James Marsh grew up in the Junction district of Toronto, surviving a difficult childhood. He began his career in publishing at Holt Rinehart and Winston, where he was editor of a centennial history of Canada entitled Unity and Diversity. He later became executive editor of McClelland and Stewart's Carleton Library series, after which he was hired by Mel Hurtig as editor-in-chief of the Canadian Encyclopedia, the biggest printing publishing endeavor in Canadian history. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you so much.
So we are going to talk about your memoir, Know It All, Finding the Impossible Country. So what did you find?
What I found with the encyclopedia was this amazing diversity. And I thought I'd find the Canadian identity itself, but it was so fragmented in the end, and yet so much richer than I thought it would be. And when I say finding, I'm still searching.
So what is it then? I know that in the encyclopedia, you canvassed thousands of people to contribute to it. Is that part of what you found? What exactly did you find by doing that?
Mel Hurtig planned that a bunch of editors would be sitting in an office writing this encyclopedia. And it was Peter Lougheed's great gift to the country. And I persuaded him that's not enough. It's not enough for a group of editors to be making decisions. I had been around the country enough to know that whether you're in Antigonish or you're in Victoria or you're in the Northwest Territories, they will have a different view of what some kind of centralized view of this country would be. I determined from the beginning that I wanted almost every subject in the encyclopedia to be written by somebody in situ or in their own subject area. And as it started to, I felt that it was the right decision. As the articles started to pour in, it really put a lot of stress on our staff and myself and so on. But I think that we could truly say that it was a portrait and that it was a collective endeavor. So that was my concept, and I think it worked out really well.
Is this connected to, you reference Ramsey Cook, the historian, and his limited identity approach to Canadian history? I'll just read that out if I can find it here. But would you say that was, are these things connected?
Yes, absolutely. Limited identities, as he called them. You can go any place in this country and somebody, especially I was from Toronto, and somebody is going to contest that your idea of Canada is the legitimate one. And I found the same thing when I traveled the country after the encyclopedia was published. I could sit in a radio station in Manitoba or New Brunswick, and people would phone in and say, you got this wrong, or this is our view. And so I thought it was better to collect those and put them together in the encyclopedia than it was to override them.
Would you say this is the encyclopedia? Is it a snapshot of where we stood at that point?
That's the way I saw it. And I really feel it was published in '85. And I planned that encyclopedia by looking at the previous encyclopedia, which was in the 50s. And part of the way that I determined what we were going to do, we were going to have a portrait of what we thought of our country that would be different, so different. I give one example that in mid-50s, there were hundreds of thousands of words devoted to biographies of lieutenant governors and 10,000 to artists. So I realized our country was different than how we saw it in the mid-80s. And I dare say it's different now than the encyclopedia that we produced then. It is a portrait of its time. That's the way I saw it.
Here's that Ramsey Cook quote in the book. It's on page 181. This idea of limited identity comes from Ramsey Cook, who lamented the Canadian habit of deploring our lack of identity. Quote, "We should attempt to understand and explain the regional, ethnic, and class identities that we do have," Cook wrote. "It might just be that it is in these limited identities that Canadianism is found." So that's what you did with the encyclopedia, granular.
Yes, yes. And in many ways, I was a little bit at odds with my publisher, Mel Hurtig, who was a nationalist, that there was one view of Canada, that there was a nationalism that perhaps encapsulated it all. I made sure that my contract said that I would be in charge of the encyclopedia. And he was pretty happy with it as it came in. Every now and then he'd say, well, what about economic nationalism and so on? And I listened to him and I added those, but they were added to the overall picture. They weren't the driving force.
Yeah. He wanted to bring in various statistics that you sort of resisted, right?
Yes. He daily read the Stats Canada reports and would call me on the phone, and I'd say, "No, that's going to be out of date when it's published,"
Right.
But he was a wonderful boss, to the extent he trusted what I was doing, and he let me make the decisions. I'll always be grateful to him for that.
And yet you say in the prologue, and this is when he's interviewing you for the job in 1979. You say, first of all, above all, I told him that the driving force, almost the redeeming force in my mental life from the time I was a boy, was my curiosity and my love of books. How much of our lives is determined by these encounters in which each person tries to evaluate the other, guessing, interpreting, and either trusting or evading our instincts? Mel persuaded me that he was an accomplished, ambitious man, but what did he think of me? As long as I knew him, he never said. So what does that say about him?
I don't know. Either he trusted me, and Mel listened to his friends and they kind of trusted me, so he did. But I think it's only fair to say that Mel was such a driving force, and I'm not sure how much he looked outside of himself to evaluate others. And in the end, he ended up trusting me, so the relationship did work.
Okay, that's good. But were you looking for praise from him?
A little bit, I think so. Because, Mel, people don't understand now, Mel was a force in the 80s and even slightly afterwards. If you needed somebody on the CBC or national media of any sort, he was the guy you went to. He was the one who would always give that other point of view, the one that the government is selling out Canada, the publishers are not supported. And he was so articulate in those things that he was the guy that you went to. And he was extremely well known. I meet people now who never heard of him. So I guess time passes.
Yeah, I'd like to get into that a bit, but let's just go back to, in the structure of your memoir to the beginning. And it's Dickensian. It's almost overwhelming. It's almost too much. The way that the awful childhood that you had.
I actually was worried about publishing it, and I tried to not complain. I tried not to be whining and so on, but I felt very strongly that, what is a memoir? It's a life. And I felt that I needed to be, above all, truthful to the struggles that I had, because it left me with my own question, and that is, how did I overcome that? What were the factors in my life that got me through it? And I also wanted to give a portrait of the time and the place as well. And I'm sorry if it was a little bit too much, but it was what it was.
I'm not criticizing necessarily. It's really showing the depths that you came from. I mean, these people, these parents of yours were just nasty people. They were resentful, broken, alcoholic, violent. They called you names, they hit you, they waterboarded you. It's like, what the fuck is that about?
I know. As you read it, though, in my book, I had a savior. I had a woman who adopted me before they came. And I believe that I found another world. And I lived in two worlds in my mind. And I try to describe what that conflict was in my mind. Yes, I had a difficult childhood, but I also try to show I was incredibly lucky. I was lucky to have this other person, this other loving person. And I was lucky with the friends that I found on the street or in the schools and so on. And that helped me to overcome these things.
Your mother called you a fucking, I don't know, maybe you thought about calling the book Fucking Know-It-All, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But that's what she called you.
Yes. And so I believed, and I kept that title. My publisher was a little unsure of it at the first, but I wanted to keep it because I believe there's a deep irony that she criticized me for my curiosity and my love of books and spouting little facts and so on. And I turned out to be an encyclopedist. And I believe that. And I wondered about the title, but sometimes even the conservative friends that I have that I argue with, and they see the title of it and they get this grin on their face. So I think I got it right.
Right. So you were a bit of a delinquent, running around, stealing and fighting and getting the strap at school, but you came through that. I also like these little Canadian touches. You used to kind of shoot the puck or something around against the wall in the basement. We've all done that, or many of us
Canadians, yes.
Yeah. But it's sort of lows and highs that we're looking at here. For example, your mother, unbelievably, apparently didn't give you Christmas or birthday presents. And yet Annie, this woman who adopts you for a time, at least anyway, she takes you to make-believe hockey games. Yes. Playoff games.
Yes.
Like it's highs and lows.
Yes, that was my life. And I longed for her. I longed for her to call. I longed to go to the games with her. And I reached the Holy Grail. I saw Bill Baruchel score his goal. and number 5 is my number till the end of time. Every uniform I ever wore, I had at number 5. So it was a built-in hope out of this misery.
Right. Well, again, at least you got something. At least you got something. It wasn't just all bleak.
Right. That's the point, isn't it? Yeah.
Now, you mention and praise this therapist, Zatmari. How do you pronounce that?
Zatmari.
Zatmari. And I didn't quite get exactly, he sorted out your anger and hatred for your mother, but I was really interested in knowing exactly what he did. I didn't quite get that.
I leave it as a bit of a question because I don't think that I quite got it. I sent my friends to him and they didn't work out for them. I believe that what happened was its miraculous connection that I made with him as a man. And he showed confidence in me. He maybe gave me that praise, maybe that I was looking for from others, or we made a connection. And when I left him, he said, James, you will fall in love and you will accomplish something. And that was a turning point in my, and I try to describe what a shock it was to me. I went to him for help sorting me out, and he's the man who committed my father to the mental institution. And if that isn't a second irony in my life, I don't know what is. And so there was that connection of, and I believe that's who we are. It's we are our connections to others, and that was a powerful one and an enduring one for me.
Yeah, that's also the way I see things too, is that you can either choose to look at coincidences as just coincidences or some kind of sign. That's an extraordinary coincidence.
Yes, it was. And it had a powerful influence on my life. So once again, it can be luck, or maybe I was prepared for it at the time.
Yeah. Just getting back to this idea of nationalism, before we get into the encyclopedia itself, you mentioned Mel's economic nationalism and the fact that he was part of this Committee for an Independent Canada. And you also then talk about the fact that it was revealed in 2021 that the RCMP closely monitored the activities of this group and say it was a clear indication of how deeply embedded our politicians and bureaucrats are in global capitalism and how hostile they are to stirrings of independence, or in particular, antipathy toward American capital.
Yes. I had an ambivalent relationship with that organization because I'm a lower class kid and I didn't grow up in that capitalist world. And I felt that, it was a point of view. And I was attracted to it to the degree that I supported Mel, but I never joined it. I felt that I'm more of a cultural nationalist. I'm more that who are Canadians, we are our writers and our artists and so on. And so I felt that, that it was a very difficult mental challenge for me to overcome this, all these wonderful people like Mel and Abe Rothstein and all the people who were members of this committee who were doing good work and trying to resist the Americanization of Canada. So I was very sympathetic to it, to that degree. But in the end, I felt that it was a fragment, more of a fragment. I felt that there should be, I didn't know what they thought of Canada. What should it be, other than more government subventions or more government support for their publishing companies and so on. I was caught up in it, but I was never a true believer to that extent.
That's interesting, because I am a believer, and my sense is that, Canada was raped, that, if more money had stayed in the country, more headquarters were here, more decisions were made here, then, the arts would have received more funding, more interesting people would have come to live here. Because as you say, it's about connections, it's about living in places where there are interesting people, and that's what creates culture. So I focused in on your ambivalence, and there definitely, in my mind, is a strong connection between economic independence and cultural expression.
Yes. I think it's a lost cause, though, don't you?
I do think it's a lost cause. I think Walter Gordon's budget of 1963, that was it.
Yes, that was the highlight. That was
he tried, and look what the elite did.
And that was, I think, the point of the quote that you read was the deep, obsession our governments had, and to be fair, our bureaucrats, because I ran into a lot of that as well. And that's why they were monitoring. It's why they had the RCMP. And I like what Stephen Assi said. He said they didn't have a clue. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. These were not subversives. They weren't treasonous, but anything against any American capital that might be brought across the border to buy out our own industries, they were in favor of it. And of course, it happened with McClelland and Stewart in the end, didn't it?
Well, and that's exactly what you point to in the next paragraph. You say these days, neither bureaucrats nor politicians show any enthusiasm to enforce the scraps of laws protecting Canadian culture and that are still on the books, as the federally approved takeover of McClelland and Stewart by the German-owned Random House in 2011 showed. They've given up.
Yes, they're not interested, even a liberal government, but particularly conservative governments.
Yeah.
It dismantled it all.
That's awfully sad. It's a sad space to be in, isn't it?
It is, but we are the victims of this international capitalism and the belief that, investment and capital should be driving everything, including our culture.
Yeah. You spend the last 100 pages or of a 300-page book talking about, first of all, your time with heading up the editorial of Carleton Library series, which resurrected important books. I mean, that's a wonderful mission.
It was. And it was one of Jack McClelland's contributions. I describe a rocky relationship that I had with Jack. He was always, I don't know why, he seemed to be slightly suspicious of me, but I can't say enough about what he did for us. I wouldn't say he created Canadian culture, but he nurtured it better than anybody that we've ever had in English Canada. And the Carleton Library series was, with the new Canadian Library series, did the same for our literature.
Yeah.
Our students had this great resource of almost 200 books in the Carleton Library series that were affordable and available to our students to study our country. It was wonderful. And that's sad that company is no longer
totally
operating at that level.
Yeah. Well, it's so fitting that I think it was the first title was Lament for a Nation.
Yes. Another piece of luck that I had to be exposed to George Grant. I am not a conservative, and I try to explain I'm a liberal at heart, individualist, and I'm not a religious person. And yet his lament for what could have been Canada is truly the most powerful expression that I've ever read. And I basically end my book not pessimistic, but worried about what we are.
Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned the fact that this was the encyclopedia was Alberta's gift to Canada.
Yes.
on their 75th anniversary, and that Peter Lougheed, who you laud,
yes,
I think they came up with about $3.5 million. But Mel still had to go out and get money from the banks, and he resented the way they treated him, I think.
Yes. It was almost his obsession for the rest of his life about how the banks mistreated him. I mean, to be fair, he was in a lot of financial difficulty, as all Canadian publishers are, and it was a bit of a tough sell to get another $3 million to print and bind this thing. And so he did a magnificent job in persuading them ultimately to fund this thing. But it was Peter Lougheed's, without his $3.5 million, it never would have happened. It just simply wouldn't. And that paid for all the research and development of the encyclopedia. And as Mel went, he was a fabulous salesman. And as he got more and more orders, it became more and more easy for the banks to see. I mean, we sold that thing out inside 3 months.
I know, that's
150,000 sets of 3 volumes each. I mean, talk about a bestseller.
Well, I was about to say 5,000 books is a bestseller. It's an incredible publishing achievement.
It was, yes.
Yes. Given the size of the country, and I'm so happy. I've got a set in the box. I found one in the actual cardboard box. I mean, I imagine you've got a fair amount of them hanging around, but still, they're becoming less and less common to find them.
Are they? I haven't looked for one, so I didn't know. Of course, it's online now, and people don't look less to books and more to online.
Of course, yeah. So what then did you do specifically? You got the job, then what did you do?
What I did was I studied. I wanted to know what's an I started with Diderot. I read his biography. I wanted to know what an encyclopedia was. I wanted to strive for what would be the best that I could do with it. I studied. I went to New York and I went to Chicago, and I studied in the National Archives, how was Canadiana made? And so I put together a very detailed plan of what I thought it should be, and more importantly, what the process would be to achieve it. It had to be published within 5 years. I mean, it took me longer than that to write my memoir, and so it had to be very carefully planned. And I think it did a good job of that, so that as I hired people, and as I hired consultants, and as I hired authors, I could tell them what they had to do to get this thing done. So that was my role in it. Of course, in the end, I had to edit the whole thing after my editors provided me with their edited articles. So that was an intense job. But I think primarily to be that center and have that plan was really what I felt that I had to do. And I felt satisfied in the end that I had accomplished it.
Okay, so what should an encyclopedia be then?
It should strive. It can't accomplish. It can't. Diderot thought that he was going to encompass the world. I mean, that was that's impossible at any time, but right. It should be a goal. Everything Canadian, but of course it won't be everything. But if you strive towards it, I think that you can persuade people that you made a really good effort at it, that you can take down your encyclopedia. I had, right after the encyclopedia was published, I had some friends come out from Quebec and say, well, I had no idea about Alberta. Other people would tell me in other parts of the country, I had no idea about the North. I had no idea about the depth of our literature and our artistic accomplishments, not to mention music here. So that if they could look at not only themselves, because they do that first, but they could look elsewhere and they could see the richness of who we are and what we have accomplished and what we could still accomplish. I think that was as close as I could get to including all things Canadian. People write me, and they still do. Well, you left this out or you left that out, and say sorry, and we move on. From that. An encyclopedia is even more impossible now. Look at Wikipedia. I mean, when they got down to Wales, who was one of the founders of it, when he gets down to putting a restaurant in that he ate in South Africa, and he writes an article in Wikipedia about it. I mean, that's trying to be so inclusive that it's useless. Yes. You know what I mean? Yes. And now I think I talk a little bit in the book about how I had an idea that something had to be significant to be included. And,
yeah, that's a tough line. That's a tough line. Like, what's significant?
Exactly.
Well, what is it? What is it for you?
What it was for me was how was it in relation to other things? The article on Vernon is going to be smaller than the article on Toronto. They're both significant, but then I made decisions, numbers of words, or who's going to write it, and those sorts of things. And I'm looked down on now for having these kinds of, exclusionary, let's call them, the attitude that I had. And I got into a little bit of trouble, not too much, that this writer deserves this number of words, and Margaret Atwood deserves this number of words. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry that we do make these decisions in our life, but you can't be, I shouldn't even be saying this out loud right now, because it's a different world now. I don't care how inclusionary you are, you're still only striving for an ideal. And and so it's still the same process, but just with different results, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we have some sort of, I don't want to call it authority, or that ranks things, that says, yes, this is more important than that. And if you want to talk about it, well, let's talk about it. But I'm going to do that. And here it is. Yes. And argue with me, but don't just get angry and dismiss it.
Right. It wasn't only me. I mean, I was the ultimate decider, but I talked to people. I gathered together experts. I got together people who were generalists, and talk to them about it. And I easily changed my mind if others would disagree with it. So it wasn't just one person's view of what was important in this country. And it was a shared, I like to think it was a community that created the Canadian Encyclopedia. And that was my goal.
So that would be one of the reasons for its success?
It was when it was published, for sure. It absolutely was. And I think my energetic publisher, Derville, did a magnificent job of covering the cover and what people said about it. That it was a mirror of Canada, that it was Canada in a nutshell. We got fabulous reviews. Do reviews actually occur anymore? I mean, they certainly, once we went electronic, nobody looked at the reviews of our CD-ROMs, but it was still, publishing was still a part of a broader literary landscape when the encyclopedia, and the reviewers had as much to say about what the thing was as the book did. They interpreted it, and they spread the word with people. And I got thousands of letters from Canadians, sometimes with complaints, mostly starting with saying, this is a magnificent accomplishment, and I can look at these books and see Canada.
Do you think it seems to me the way that it sold out so quickly, and obviously you're hitting a real need.
Absolutely. And I believe 1985, in a few years afterwards, if there was a Canadian nationalism, let's call it an English Canadian nationalism, well, it was very successful, the French edition in Quebec, it was at its peak. I think that there was the right time. I don't know what would happen to it if I published that right now. I really could not predict what would have happened, but it was the right time. That they were still, as we have said, debates about our economic nationalism. There were still, a kind of we're still a post-Centennial enthusiasm for the country. Yeah. And I really feel that a lot of people told me, and I had to accept it, they loved having the books. They didn't necessarily read it. It's on my shelf was a constant. But it was used in Supreme Court cases. It was used, widely, of course, in schools and libraries, and so I was proud of all of that. But I think it was the right time for that. The second edition was more problematic, but we still sold it out, another 100,000 copies of it. And that makes 250,000 sets of the encyclopedia out there. It's unthinkable to have a publishing success like that now.
It is, yeah. Plus, it was on time and on budget, the first one.
Oh, well, yes, I was happy about that.
And Mel made a lot of money off it, did he or didn't he?
In the short run, he did.
Right.
He did. And I try to explain that second edition was too soon. And then the junior encyclopedia, we didn't know what to do. We published this thing, and Britannica kept itself alive with yearbooks, and Mel just didn't really know what to do. And he made a fatal error that I describe in the book of trying to direct market the junior encyclopedia. Yes. And he went bankrupt, and Avi Bennett bought the encyclopedia. He wasn't really interested in the company, but he bought and saved the encyclopedia's future, as it were.
Didn't he? He said he bought you, but you were let go though.
Yes, by Mel. I was, yeah. I was actually hurt about that, but there was nothing he could do. He was in bankruptcy.
Right. So did he end up in poverty or not?
No, he did not, because he made a great deal selling the encyclopedia to Avi and had an annual income, and he had a best-selling memoir. He sold 100,000 copies of his memoir. So there was still all those Canadians out there who were interested. And it was all about the death of the country and the pessimism that he was able to convey had a real market to it, and he wasn't the world's greatest writer, but he was very persuasive as a polemicist. So he made money from that, as well as the income that he had from McClelland and Stewart.
I like the fact too, it was kind of interesting how you wanted a sort of a percentage of the action, but it was based on getting good reviews.
I know, it's written in large letters right in there. And I think I might have mentioned the very first review that I heard was of this fellow with an English accent from Carleton University and saying, it's no work of genius. I thought, there goes my bonus,
Yes.
But I was saved shortly after when the great Canadian historian John Saywell phoned me and said, who the hell are you to have created this? I never even heard of you.
Right.
And then the reviews were, the rest of the reviews were very good. So I was able to cash a bit of a check at the end of all of that.
That's good. How big was the check?
100,000.
That's all right. That's on top of your salary.
It was.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Plus you got an Order of Canada. That doesn't hurt either.
It didn't hurt. And even more impressive, I think, the great medal from the Royal Society of Canada. It's rarely given out, and I was very proud to receive that as well. The Dawson Award. I've been very well rewarded for my work as an editor. We're not that famous,
No, exactly. Yes.
Yeah, we're supposed to be invisible, in fact.
That's right. Well, you're smashing that with this memoir, aren't you?
Well, we'll see.
One of the interesting aspects too that you touch on is how this all happened, putting this encyclopedia together right before really the internet came in. So it was all old-fashioned technology.
It was. I still remember the typesetting still going on, setting lead. I mean, I lived the digital revolution. By the time of the second edition, we were typesetting with the computer. And then with the CD-ROM, we were delivering the information, not just putting it together, but delivering it on CD-ROM. And that was a brief and we sold hundreds of thousands of copies of the CD-ROM as well. And then I think I was 2 or 4 months behind Wikipedia and putting the encyclopedia online. So I kind of lived through the digital revolution and tried to keep up with it, and the encyclopedia was a lovely thing to go online because it was a database.
Yes, it's perfect.
Now, I think a huge amount is lost. A set of books sitting on, and you take it out and you look through it, is different because you can discover more. You can flip through the books. You read one article and read what's next to it. The power of being online is you can search and find anything you want, but these connections are missing. And so I think it's not entirely just the most positive thing, but it's really put any reference work that will be produced in print in the past. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, that aspect of serendipity is also found, of course, in bookstores when you do look for, which is lovely. Yeah.
Or libraries.
Or libraries, yes. Yeah. What happened again with the ownership? And you've worked on this, what, ever since?
No, I retired in 2014.
No, but what I mean is from the period when the books were published, and then you moved into the digital, but that was what you did, right?
That's what I was the editor-in-chief of all of that.
Right.
And a whole lot of other things that we did online, creating Canadian information and trying to make the internet more Canadian, to making more information available. I did a lot of dozens of websites that my staff also put together to provide schools with, whether it's Aboriginal themes or the Chinese in Canada, and we were producing these supplementary things. I tried to think through about what an electronic encyclopedia could be. other than, say, Wikipedia or what the encyclopedia is online. But I never succeeded in raising the money for that, and that was a bit of a regret at the end of my career. I wanted something richer. I wanted something, more engaging, particularly for students, and that never came about, and maybe it will one day, but not under my direction, obviously.
What do you mean by more engaging? Like more multimedia? Is that what you mean?
Not only more multimedia, but if you look up one thing other than cross-references, that there would be related things for you. So if you were looking into poverty, then it's not, you don't get one article on poverty, which is what an encyclopedia does, but there would be commentary on it. There would be other perspectives, that there would be also multimedia to give you a more visual idea of what we're talking about. That's the kind of thing that I really thought, but it was going to be very expensive and intensive. So a number of the websites that we did were very much like that. And I'm not just talking about being a wiki where everybody can express their opinion, but this would be, once again, my idea of experts and people of different opinions who have studied these things, putting you in the middle of a discussion about Canadian, whether it's federalism or residential schools or whatever the issue is, that there would be a much more engaging, is the word that I constantly use, presentation of that information.
And of course, there's such division that, almost every single topic has a different spin on it, doesn't it, from different sides?
Yes, it does.
They'll complain that their side isn't represented in the article.
That's right. But we could be broader. We could deal with that, and then people could go on. I mean, right now, there aren't even two sides to an argument in people who are posting or shouting or driving their trucks and blocking things. It's one big idea that they've got that expresses either their victimhood or their resentment. And it's not a conversation at all. And without conversation, we can't have a democracy.
I think you make the remark that we don't have people like Lougheed around so much anymore, because this clearly is something that, government should be looking at.
I don't see that we have politicians who care about the things. I mean, Peter was known as being the sheik of Alberta because of the oil thing, but he deeply cared about the country. And that's why he put up this money for this encyclopedia. I got to know him, and I wrote the chapter on the Lougheed years for the University of Alberta's History of Alberta. I interviewed him at length, and he just kept talking about how he cared, and he wanted Alberta to have money so they could spend it on culture, so we could spend it on. And he was deeply committed to Canadian history and was a member of Historicus board for years. And he said that the greatest failure in his political career was not making sure that students were properly exposed to what Canada is and what its history was. So, so I can't think of a Canadian politician who would be torturing themselves about that these days. Too many other things to worry about, I guess.
He went to Harvard, didn't he?
Yes. So.
One of the things I like about the book, too, is that, there's some love stories in here. I want to know more about that woman with the two different color eyes.
I wish I knew more about her. We talked about conversation, didn't we? And we're having one. And I feel that at a certain time in my life that I was open to talking to people. And when I was traveling across country, and I had been given her name, and when I was able to sit down with her, can you imagine we're talking about Théâtre de Chardin, and we just met each other, and she took me to a concert, and I was open to these things, and she changed my life. And just as my great love affair that I tried to explain, that was my first love affair, she changed my life profoundly, because we had poetry, we had conversation, we probed one another, And I feel that, as you know, coming out of that childhood that I had, that I could find love in these conversations and in these relationships, and get confused about it, and end up longing for people, you know, afterwards. It's all part of being alive and being in love, isn't it? I remember when Lorraine, she said, Jim, send me 2 chapters, and then she sent me a contract, and I had it in the back of my mind. If she tells me to take that love story out, I'm not publishing this book.
Good for you. Good for you.
Good.
And, well, it's funny because it is a bit jarring. You know, you've got about 100 pages on an encyclopedia, you know, and it's not dry, but you know, the topic of the encyclopedia, and then you've got these torrid, or 1 or 2 of these torrid affairs. But it does tie in nicely with this theme of conversation. And that's one thing I took from it too, is just how lovely it is to, you know, have an encounter like you had, and to talk about art and literature and these types of things simultaneously. They both enrich each other.
Thank you. You know, I think that's how I came out of that childhood, and how I was able to accomplish something, as well as my deep friendships that I try to, that was a constant theme in my life, not just falling in love, but having friends. And it's such a gift, and I'm not sure that we always appreciate it enough, you know?
Well, at the very end, you talk about in the acknowledgement, you talk about the fact that you have connected with your brothers and sisters far from the memories and the maelstrom of the early family.
Yes. And they made their own ways, and I'm proud of them for that. And I think I had a bit of an advantage because I had Annie to help me up. And fortunately for my siblings, my father was committed to an institution, and my mother was able to then relax from having that constant aggravation in her life. And so my siblings have done very well, and we love one another. It's been very rewarding.
Well, it was rewarding to read your memoir. Jim, thank you so much for writing it and coming on to the show.
I really appreciate talking to you. I'm a great fan of your conversations with others. It's been wonderful talking to you, Nigel. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And now you're going to go out to a coffee shop, aren't you, in Prague, and watch the people go by?
Yeah, I might even have a beer, actually.
Oh, good for you. Yes.
James Marsh is the author of Know It All, Finding the Impossible Country, and that's published by Duraval, and they're based in
Calgary, Alberta.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Thank you, Nigel. Appreciate it. Hope to see you again.